In this fraught and sometimes even frightening political landscape, what's the most effective way to make your voice heard? Well, today I'm joined by two people focused on effective engagement and advocacy. Sam Daley-Harris, author of Reclaiming Our Democracy, Healing the Break Between People and Government. He's also the founder of Results, a citizens lobby focused on poverty and hunger. Welcome, Sam.
Great to be here.
It's great to have you. I'm also joined by Angela Rodriguez here in studio. She's the co-leader of North Florida Results Chapter. Welcome.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for having us.
Sam, we live in a democracy, but in your experience, we don't really know how to do democracy. What are we missing?
Well, the basic idea in the book is transformational advocacy. And really, most of us know transactional, sign the petition, transaction complete. But with transformational advocacy, you're trained, encouraged, and then succeed at doing things as an advocate you never thought you could do, like meet with your member of Congress and bring them on board to your issue. And when you do that, you see yourself in a new light. Really, that's the transformation, kind of like I can't make a difference to I can. But you need to find an organization that will train you and encourage you.
So when you talk about transformational advocacy, you're talking maybe less about the transformation that happens on the outside because of the work you're doing and more that happens internally.
Well, both. First, of course, it's what happens inside of us, and we're changed. But hopefully, we're working on issues that will make a difference in the world and change things on the outside. It's a little like, sitting on the couch and watching the show, rather than putting on the show as a kid. You get involved rather than sitting and watching in the stands.
So your book was recently updated and revised. What has changed since you first wrote it in 1994 in terms of its message and its applicability?
Yeah, let me just say, I was interviewed some months ago, and the host, I think, spoke for Americans when he said, the nature of our politics, you can feel beat down by it. I mean, this is my career and I feel beat down by it. It's a grind. It's a grind. That's what he said to me. And I think that's what people feel. And one of the things I said was Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweickart said, we aren't passengers on spaceship Earth. We're the crew. Well, are we? And if we're crew, we need to get off the couch and get involved. And the other thing I said was futurist Alex Steffen said, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. Well, yeah, if I'm cynical, I'm obedient to the way things are. Why am I going to do anything if nothing I do makes a difference? So what's changed is, I think, the volume on the cynicism and the hopelessness has gone up, and we need transformational advocacy more than ever.
But in terms of your practical suggestions, how have they changed in that time? Are there some things that you were recommending in 1994 that no longer apply, or that or have become, the opposite is true?
Yeah, I think certainly in 1995, we weren't talking about social media, and you need to be involved as an organization, as an individuals in social media. But I think it's back to basics on organizing. Let me just say one thing. When you're looking for an organization that delivers transformational advocacy, they do three things. One is they recruit people and form them into chapters, and they build community, like a nationwide monthly webinar with guest speakers and Q&A. Recruitment and building community. Two, training. How do you get the meeting? How do you plan for the meeting? How do you write a letter to the editor? Two, training. Three, they encourage breakthroughs. They encourage you to do things you never thought you could do and see yourself differently. So that's the ingredients for an organization that's aiming to deliver transformational advocacy, recruitment and building community, training, and encouraging breakthroughs.
Angela, one of Sam's main points is that many people want to engage in democracy, but they don't know how. How do you find his message helpful, and what sort of techniques or tactics have you learned from him about engaging more effectively?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I've learned is that you can walk into your local representative's office and talk to them and tell them what you want them to do. They work for you. And I think just kind of realizing that you have value as their constituent, and that your message is something that they should want to hear, was kind of life-changing for me. And the things that I've learned is that it's all about relationship building. You know, you don't just walk in and say, hey, I want you to pass this bill, or I want you to, use this budget. You say, hey, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your background. Why do you believe these things? Why do you not want to pass this bill? Or why would you? How can we get your support? So it's a lot more than just, submitting a letter, signing a petition. It's about building relationships.
And so how do you come to advocacy yourself? Are you from this area originally? And what was your entree?
I am from Jacksonville, born and raised. I have a background in marketing, so I do not come to this naturally. But after 2020, I found myself being a self-employed marketing consultant. I had a lot more time on my hands. And because of the life that I was born into, I believe that I was born into great privilege. Lived poverty is not something that I have experience with. But to me, the only people fighting poverty shouldn't be the ones who've experienced it or are currently experiencing it. I think everyone needs to chip in. And so it was really important for me to get involved with my spare time to actually help people that don't have that spare time.
And how did you find results, particularly? What drew you to the organization?
Yeah, I Googled it. I Googled an organization that went beyond petitioning, beyond marching. All of those things are very important, and I still do them. But I wanted to have an opportunity to actually get involved. And when I saw that not only did they meet with their local representatives, but they actually go to Washington, D.C. and meet with representatives on the Hill, I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't even know we could do that. And I signed up immediately.
And so, there's people who feel like they're involved, who do, sign petitions, they do donate to certain organizations that they support. And I think that they would say, look, I am involved.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think that is a very needed part of advocacy, because I think it emboldens the crowd. It gives us a sense of community when we're all together. But it's not everything. It's not all we should be doing. And everyone has their different strengths. And if going in to meet with a member of Congress is not something that you could ever see yourself do, then don't do that. Like Sam said, find something that ignites your passion, that you're passionate about.
Sam, I want to ask you about that in terms of, effective advocacy and involvement. You talk about transactional advocacy, and you kind of said, that's the petition signing, maybe making a donation, as opposed to transformational. Do you think that people who are engaged in transactional advocacy necessarily should move to a more engaged transformational style?
Well, first of all, I think it would be more satisfying for them to go deeper than the click. And I think sometimes you get a false sense of accomplishment. Let me give you like a poll. Recently, the Congressional Management Foundation surveyed advocacy professionals and asked them what their main tactic was. And 79% of advocacy professionals said an email form letter. Give me your zip code and your name and we'll send the letter for you. 79% said an email form letter was their primary tactic, but only 3% of congressional staff said that made a big difference. So we're mostly being fed these email form letters, but only 3% of congressional staff said that made a big difference in their offices' decision making. So yeah, I think people deserve to feel what I would call the joy of deeper engagement rather than the frustration of sitting on the sidelines.
I want to come back to that, but we've got a call from Eric in Arlington. Eric, welcome to First Coast Connect. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been calling talk radio shows about political issues since the 80s, and I started publishing essays in the 2000s. I published about 50 or 60 in the newspaper and so on. and I don't know that I've changed even one person's mind. But I have found that one thing that does work, or seems to work, is if you can get into a conversation with someone at work that remains casual about politics, you'll find that the more you talk, the more that you agree about things. And I think that's like a soft way to convince people to be an advocate on a little stage, if you will. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Eric. I will ask, first of all, your thoughts about that, Sam.
Yeah, one of the ideas in the book is trim tabbing, where if you want to turn an ocean liner, don't turn it, don't even try and turn the rudder. There's a little trim tab at the end. And Buckminster Fuller used that term with regard to the ship of state. What are the trim tabs? Is your member of Congress a trim tab? Is the local newspaper? Who are the community leaders that might be trim tabs and making
Can
those
you explain?
kinds of change? If I could just add this,
Well,
I
just explain
started
what
the
a
book.
trim tab is first, because I'm not sure people know what a trim tab is.
Well, it's a little tiny rudder at the back of a huge rudder on an ocean liner. There are so trim tabs on airplanes, those little flaps that help, with a little motion, change the course of the ship or of the airplane. And I start the book with a journalist in Washington, D.C., retiring. His last column, he says, "I've written 2 million words by my rough calculation, and I don't think anything I've written has changed anything." Well, Results Volunteers started lobbying on child survival in 1984. I don't think Angela was necessarily born yet. And we've lobbied the volunteers every year for the last 40 years on global child deaths. And the global child death rate has fallen by 66% because of the persistent, educating themselves and then talking to decision makers year after year. So I know the idea of frustration, nothing's changed, but if we connect with the right organizations, we can make some big change.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about how to become a transformative advocate. You can join our conversation on social media. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can call us at 904-549-2937. Sam, you were talking about letter writing, efforts, and I would guess that you're absolutely correct that those are largely ignored unless there's a giant volume of them, received on a certain topic by someone in Congress. But what do you know about how effective an actual, handwritten letter is?
Well, an actual handwritten letter matters more than these email form letters, that's for sure. But for example, when someone gets a letter to the editor published in the newspaper, I urge them to do a dance and celebrate that let's say we're talking about an activist on an issue they care about. But then I urge them to send it to their elected official and call the aide on the phone to make sure that they read it and that they saw it. So it's this follow-up and this face-to-face that matters more than these other actions. Don't stop doing the other actions. It's just start doing what Angela talked about, which was building relationships.
And so, Angela, practically speaking, how do you do that? Who are you in touch with? How do you initiate a conversation with a lawmaker, for instance?
Typically, we start by reaching out to one of their staffers. Sometimes they'll have a scheduler specifically there to help schedule meetings. And then sometimes we can get a little further. So, for instance, tomorrow morning, we're going to be meeting with Marco Rubio's tax aide. And we'll be talking to him about a particular bill that we'd like them to pass and actually bring up in the Senate. And so that conversation started by reaching out to the office, and then we were pointed in that direction. Not all the time will you actually meet with the representative themselves, but I have been in meetings where we have, and that's been interesting.
And so what do you go to them with? And you want to tell us what the bill is about that you're presenting or that you're asking him to introduce?
Yeah. Excuse me. It's the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act. And the reason Results wants this to be voted upon in the Senate is because it includes an expansion of the child tax credit. And we know that in 2021, when Congress allowed the expansion of the child tax credit during the pandemic to expire, we saw a record rise in child poverty in the United States. And The expansion of the child tax credit in this particular bill does not reach that extent, but it starts the trend back towards where we were. The rise in poverty that we saw was the largest in 50 years. So it's like we're going backwards, and we want to fix that.
And conversely, when that child tax credit was, implemented, it did create a real decline in child poverty.
It had a huge impact.
And that's, I guess a few $100s a month, perhaps for a family with children.
Absolutely. And not only that, it's something that would be enacted retroactively. So it would apply to the 2023 tax season. And then it would move forward into 24 and 25. And that money would go directly to the families that need it.
And so making the transition from somebody who, believed in anti-poverty, hunger programs, was it difficult for you to become the person doing the advocacy, going to these meetings, making those asks?
It was nerve-wracking. It was intimidating. But I think the team at Results, they do a great job of educating you. First of all, these issues are incredibly complex, and they're all so smart and well-informed, and they transfer that knowledge to you. So you don't go into a meeting feeling unprepared. But I think, everyone has the same story about their first meeting. They're expecting, it to be contentious, and what are they going to say to me? What if they're not, on my side? What if they don't support the bill? But that's not it at all. You have typically very informed and nice discussion with the representative or the staff. And they want to hear you out, and they're not mean.
It's good to know. We have a message from Ed on Facebook. He says, advocating for a cause is one of the benefits of living in a democracy, as long as we do it peacefully with no violence, vandalism, looting, or blocking of roads and bridges. Sam, I'm going to ask you about that. There have been, protests in recent years that have gotten a lot of attention. Some would say really moved the needle on discussions, particularly around race. But they have also involved, a lot of civil disobedience, including things like blocking roads and bridges. What's your thought on that?
Well, one of the ideas of transformational advocacy is not only bipartisanship, but of course, a nonviolence. I want to just give you an inkling of when I'm coaching a group who's meeting with a member of Congress who opposes your bill, I have the group ask 3 questions. 1, we know you don't support this bill. What would it take to change your mind? 2, can you say more about that? 3, why do you think that is? So it's a deep listening exercise and an example of what Angela was talking about earlier, of building relationship. In this case, with someone who might oppose your bill, you start with, we know you don't support this. What would it take to change your mind? You're listening for assignments. What is it that you could do that would help change their mind?
And so you're listening deeply, but you're also probably forcing them on some level to formulate a way forward, right? You're asking them, what would it take? And they're then taking that suggestion to come up with a solution, even if they don't ultimately find one.
Right. Actually, I was coaching a guy in South Florida who was using this about climate change and getting a lead sponsor on the Climate Solutions Congress, a Republican and a Democrat. And the member of Congress said, well, if you could get the chambers of commerce on board. And he did. He came back with letters from the chambers of commerce. And the congressman said, well, if you could get the mayors on board. And he did. He came back with support from the mayors. And it made a difference that the congressman said what it would take to change his mind. He heard the assignments and he delivered. And it made that difference.
We have a call, Tiffany on the South Side. Good morning, Tiffany. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I'm so happy to hear this conversation this morning. I just also wanted to highlight the importance of families being more civic-minded. I currently participate in a program that's actually offered right here in Jacksonville through the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, through Kids Hope Alliance, and also Duval County Public Schools, called Parents Who Lead. The whole premise behind this is to advocate, to teach parents how to advocate, not just for their children, but for other children. And some of the things that I've heard you highlight, following up with the letters, how to speak to legislators, how to advocate, is something that I think right now a lot of our parents are unequipped to do. But organizations like Parents Who Lead, who's under the National Parent Leadership Training Institute, are really, really grabbing this by the horns to teach families how to advocate, especially during a time when there's so much controversy on a number of topics.
So, Tiffany, how do you train people in your organization or help them become, more able to have those conversations?
To become parents that lead? Great question. So what we do, we have a 20-week cohort, and that cohort is sponsored by Duval County Public Schools, the Jacksonville Public Education Fund. We have an interview process. I myself, along with a few other facilitators who actually graduated from the program, are now advocating for the program and teaching this, the tools to other parents. But there's an interview process where parents are interviewed from around the city of Jacksonville, regardless of, where their children are in public, private, or charter. And for 20 weeks, we sit in the classroom and we go from start to finish. We talk about the media. We talk about legislators. We talk about how a bill becomes a law. We talk about presentation. We just recently did something on framing, on language, the things that you say in the media and how it can be misconstrued because of sound bites. So,
interesting.
Yes, it's an amazing program.
Well, thanks a lot, Tiffany, for your call. Angela, what do you think about the approach that they're taking? Is that similar to the training that you received?
It's exactly the same. And that's incredible, Tiffany. Thank you for sharing that. We'll have to look into that organization.
We have a question from John on Facebook, also talking about direct action. He's saying, well, how about direct action tactics such as closing down freeways and bridges? What do your guests think about those tactics versus just sending emails? Sam, what do you think about those?
Well, again, that's not my cup of tea. And the question, in the book, I talk about someone who said, I was at this protest and I wondered, it was outside of Congress. I was like, why weren't we going inside and talking to the lawmakers and decision makers? So, my point is back to relationships. So you can close down the freeway, but who is it that you're asking to change something? And what is the change you want? And talk to those people and get those people on board. And that's really the way I go with things.
We also have a message on Facebook from JP. He says, as a longtime professional in advocacy, I've learned one great truth. This work, like using soap, you have to do it every day if it's going to make a difference. It takes time. Some issues are dirtier than others. And just because you cleaned it up yesterday doesn't mean you won't need to clean it up again tomorrow. So he's saying there'll be successes, but it's important to know that we can't really fix things. We can only make the world a more just and beautiful place in sort of a gradual way. It does require a certain diligence, doesn't it, Angela? I mean, there's issues that you feel like you've put a lot of work into, and then you have to revisit again and again, whether it's a new lawmaker that's elected or, a change in policy.
Right. And a lot of times staffers for the representatives will change. So you have a new person to make a new relationship with. So yeah, it's really never ending. And there's a lot of follow-up and a lot of, asking questions. Did you do this? Why would you support this? Why don't you support this? And just getting to know them and trying to understand what it is that gets them to be involved or it gets them to care about an issue. And that takes time and consistency. So
how do you not get discouraged? If it takes time to build these relationships and then the person leaves, you have to start over. How do you keep up your enthusiasm?
Well, that is difficult, but I think the team that you're surrounded by, everyone is so incredibly passionate about what we do at Results that really nothing can stop us. And it's like a new challenge. And like I said, building relationships with the staffers is not as intimidating as I thought it would be. And they're all open to hearing their constituents.
And so, Sam, when someone like Angela comes to you and you're trying to transform her from a volunteer into a really, a citizen lobbyist, somebody that's able to be effective on that stage, what do you need to do to take them to that level?
Well, the main thing is that you offer a powerful structure of support. And I'm going to go back to an earlier answer about the child tax credit as an example. When it was first enacted at the beginning of COVID, it was passed in the Senate on a Saturday. And that was when Results' national monthly webinar, wash your hands every day. And Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio came off the Senate floor and jumped on the Results national webinar. And he said, today was the most important day of my time in Congress. And now we have to start working to make the child tax credit permanent, because at that point it was about to cut child poverty in half in the United States. And the House, the Republican-led House, has enacted this child tax credit by over 300 votes. And now we're working on the Senate. And there's Angela talking about her meeting tomorrow with Marco Rubio's top aide on tax policy. So that's the long term and a glimpse of that, one of those building community and helping people month in and month out with that webinar, and the senator jumping on the call, urging the volunteers on.
But a big part of your book and your work is about moving people out of their comfort zone, making them do something that they're not naturally inclined to do and perhaps really are afraid of or disinclined to do. How do you get people beyond that? And why is it important to push people out of their comfort zone?
Well, okay, so we're not kicking people out of their comfort zone. We're encouraging them out of their comfort zone. And so, we're giving them the training they need. There's a story in the book, volunteer Maxine Thomas. She said, I had a heart for service, but I was clueless about advocacy. And she goes to her first ever meeting with her senator who said, it was an out-of-body experience. I was like in this exclusive meeting. I was nervous, worried that I wouldn't say the right thing. But after a full day of first ever meetings, she says, I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something revolutionary. So starting from I was nervous, worried I wouldn't say the right thing, to I was euphoric, I was on this high, that's transformation. And it's because she had training. It's because she had a group around her. She wasn't doing it alone. Those are important ingredients.
And you also say that having, that level of involvement, some people might consider it, getting involved in causes that are difficult, that gives them, a feeling of, despair. It's such a big project or a big issue that they're trying to tackle. But your suggestion is that involvement can actually be very, satisfying as opposed to a drag.
Yes, well, one of the stories in the book, I'll tell the short version. She entered another group, Citizens Climate Lobby, suffering from climate trauma. She said, I would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and weep at home and weep at work. But at the end of a 4-day period, 18 months after joining, meeting with 20 congressional offices, she described her experience as sacred and profound. So moving from climate trauma to sacred and profound is, again, a transformation, a very big distance.
Angela, I've heard some discussions in the environmental community about giving people something to hope for because climate change is such a difficult topic, and being at a threshold where there is a lot of, consequences at hand because of the warming of the climate, offering people the idea that, even this reduction is as, dire as things might get weather-wise, there's species that could be saved, this particular one, that particular one, kind of giving them a measurement or a metric. Is it helpful to sort of take things in bite-sized, chunks when you're looking at these large, seemingly intractable issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of our strategy. There are dozens and dozens of issues that we champion at Results. And tomorrow morning, we're only going to be talking about one of them. And it's important to make sure that you're talking to the right person about the right issue. And there is someone to talk to at your local representative's office.
And how about control? I mean, one of the concerns sometimes for local advocates is representing a group, perhaps not exactly the way the group wants to be represented. So sometimes the tendency of a group to want to control the message, to control the messengers, and make sure nobody's getting off script. Sam, how do you suggest organizations deal with that tendency or that inclination?
Well, many of the groups I coach, one of the things when they're starting a chapter is they start with a 4-part new group training, which is a big ask of volunteers. But, an earlier caller was talking about a 20-part training series, which is so brilliant. So if you really train folks, if you have a monthly conference call or webinar with guest speakers, Q&A, and inspiration, you kind of get people on track and on board for what your issue is. And you don't just get the meeting with the aide tomorrow, you practice for the meeting. So you kind of find out if you have any people who are going to take things off course. So it's an issue of training and group support.
So, Angela, you've got this meeting tomorrow, which represents a success. What is next for the local results chapter? And if somebody is interested in getting involved, how can they?
Yeah, well, they can get involved. We have monthly meetings via Zoom right now, so very super easy to attend. And if they're interested in attending the next one next month, they can email resultsnorthflorida@gmail.com. That'll go directly to me. We also have a conference coming up on Saturday the 27th in Orlando, and it's our first Gulf South Regional Conference that we're hosting. And we'll have a number of experts on policy and poverty talking, and we'll all be gathering for the first time, people from Florida, Georgia, and Alabama.
Oh, excellent. Sam Daley-Harris, Angela Rodriguez, thank you so much for coming on the program today and talking about this. It's really very cool.
Thank you so
It's a
much for
thrill.
having us.